By the summer of 1975, the Sounds were the third rebranding of the ABA's attempt at pro hoops in Memphis, but they continued to perform poorly at the gate after 5 years in Tennessee. The owners sold the team to a group of Maryland investors, and the Baltimore Claws were born. Well, sort of. They had an initial roster that included Mel Daniels, Chuck Williams, and Stu Johnson, and they even pulled off a trade with the Colonels for Dan Issel. But after they failed to properly compensate Kentucky, Dan would be sold to the Nuggets instead. But it seemed like the owners of the Claws had no idea how to run a professional basketball team, as they essentially reused their Memphis uniforms. Their practice shirts were ripped, and some of the players were broke living in a motel, as nobody was being paid. The management continued to promise to provide meal money, but this never came into fruition. After only 3 preseason games, the ABA finally stepped in on October 20th, 1975, putting an end to a franchise that somehow lasted for 9 years, despite them being in danger of folding on multiple occasions, and all of the wackiness associated with the ABA. The story of the team with too many names to count takes the cake as the league's most mishandled franchise. Welcome to PZ Hoops, and this is another episode of ABA Tales. On February 2nd, 1967, a charter franchise was awarded to a group of 7 investors, and they got it for a discount, only fronting $1,000 compared to $30,000 in other cases. The team was named the New Orleans Buccaneers, and former Mississippi State head coach Babe McCarthy was the first man on the sidelines. Babe knew how to recruit talent, and their first major signing was Doug Moe. He was a star in North Carolina, but like a lot of players in the early 60s, he was connected to Jack Molinas. Even though nothing was proven, the NBA banned him for life. After playing a few years in Italy, he was in his prime when he signed to play in the Crescent City. But Doug wouldn't come alone, as he brought his best friend with him, former Tar Heel Larry Brown. The NBA ignored him because he was 5'9", but he had a chance to thrive in the more guard-oriented league. Red Robbins, Gerald Govan, Jimmy Jones, and local kid Jackie Moreland were all important parts of this up-and-coming team. Doug continued to be one of the league's best players, while Larry was a last-minute replacement in the All-Star game for Bob Verga, who was called in for military service. Red also earned an All-Star appearance as New Orleans was a well-rounded team, finishing 2nd in points and 4th in points allowed. They were first in the Western Division at 48-30, and they faced the Rockets in the semifinals. Larry had 31 points and 10 assists in Game 1, and 24 points and 10 assists in the closeout Game 5. The Buccaneers made quick work of the Chaparrals in the division finals, beating them in 5 games. They made the inaugural ABA finals, facing the Pittsburgh Pipers. Red exploded for 41 points and 23 rebounds in Game 1, but the Bucs still lost. Larry dropped 28 points and 9 assists in Game 2 to tie the series, and the team continued to trade wins back and forth, as it all came down to Game 7 in Pittsburgh. Unfortunately, New Orleans' defense failed them, allowing Pittsburgh to shoot 56% in a 9-point win for the Pipers. In their second year, New Orleans switched things up, trading Doug and Larry to the Oaks for Steve Jones and Ron Franz. The 6'5" Steve joined the 6'4" Jimmy in the starting lineup, as they formed the tallest backcourt in the league, simply known as the Jones Boys. They both carried this team, as Jim had a career year averaging 27 points a game and shooting the highest field goal percentage in the league as a point guard. Steve averaged 20 points as well, as New Orleans really turned on near the end of the year, winning the last 14 games. The fans took notice and attendance jumped by 60%, as they averaged over 3,000 fans a game. And they faced Dallas in the semifinals, and this matchup would be a lot more competitive. Jimmy really came to play, dropping 45 in Game 2, 37 in Game 5, and 27 in Game 7. As New Orleans won a close one to advance to the division finals against the Oaks. Jimmy was elite again, but the Oaks were the better team, easily sweeping them. There was some optimism in 1969, as the Bucs were able to sign Skeeter Swift, a dead-eye shooter from East Tennessee State. Gerald Govan had been great as a reserve, so he was now the starting center. The Bucs started the season off pretty well, winning 13 of their first 14 home games, including 20 of 24 at one point. The Bucs had 4 All-Stars, but things weren't as great as they seemed. Skeeter suffered a season-ending knee injury in December, and once the team started to level off, fan interest waned. It also didn't help that their 42-42 record wasn't enough for the playoffs. Due to financial constraints, the team had to move their home games to the Tulane Gymnasium, a small arena that only seated 4,500 people. The owners considered being a regional franchise, but they decided that relocating to Memphis was the best option. On August 21st, 1970, the Buccaneers were purchased by P.W. Blake, who booked the new team to play in the Mid-South Coliseum as the city's first major league team. However, the Coliseum had been booked for most of the winter, so out of the minimal dates available, the team was only able to get 3 home games on the weekends. Due to the erratic schedule, the team only sold 180 season packages. The main thing that drew attention was the boring team name, the Memphis Pros. In typical ABA fashion, the team cut corners by simply adopting another 4-letter phrase to replace the Bucs on the jersey. Memphis was able to keep most of their talent, but Wendell Ladner and Will Jones were welcome additions. The fans really weren't that concerned with the team, however, as even though they started the season 11-8, they only averaged about 1,200 fans a game. Wendell quickly became a fan favorite with his hustle and tenacity, but Memphis had a rough ending to the year, losing 16 of their last 21, but 41-43 was enough for a playoff appearance. They faced the heavily favored Pacers in the semifinals, and although they were swept, 3 of their losses were by 2 points or less. But the first season in Memphis was a disaster off the court, as PW basically gave up the team 2 months into the season. He claimed that he already lost $200,000, so he turned the team over to the league office. Finding new ownership was nearly impossible, as the wealthy Memphis residents weren't interested. The team looked to be in danger of getting sold again, until the regular citizens all pitched in, buying enough shares of stocks in the team for the league to relinquish control, even as the offering, known as the Memphis Miracle, was $100,000 less than what the league was asking for it. Things would get worse in the offseason, as Steve was tired of his low salary, so he accepted a 3-year, $210,000 deal to play in Dallas. Members of the pros front office must have been sleeping on the job, as Jimmy's team option was never exercised, and he quickly accepted a 4-year, $400,000 offer with Utah. Despite losing their best guards, they were able to draft and sign Johnny Newman, a former Ole Miss alum that averaged 40 points a game as a junior, with many comparing him to Pistol Pete. Like any Babe McCarthy-coached team, the pros were a rugged squad that fought hard and hustled every play, so they won their fair share of games. On January 3, 1972, new president A.W. Hart negotiated a blockbuster trade with the Cougars, sending Wendell Ladner, Bobby Warren, and Tom Owens to Carolina in exchange for Randy Denton, Warren Davis, and George Lehman. Coach McCarthy wasn't consulted about the trade, and fans were especially upset when Wendell was gone. McCarthy later called it the day the deal was made and the day that they traded my ball club away. Johnny and Babe frequently butted heads, as during a late game situation against the Pacers, Babe benched him and he responded, "That's fine with me, MFer." Johnny was sent back to the locker room and fined $100. He later said to the media, "I'll pay the fine, but McCarthy treats me like a dog. I've had to bow and scrape to him just so I can play. If I make one mistake, I get yanked out of the game. Other guys can make 3 or 4 mistakes before they get taken out." Johnny was scoring pretty well, but his lack of defense would get exposed in the game against the Cougars, as Larry Miller dropped an ABA record 67 points on him. Will Jones would make his All-Star debut, but Memphis was terrible, losing 22 of their last 25 games. A 26-58 finish saw them miss the playoffs for the first time in franchise history. Despite averaging over 4,400 fans a game, their financial problems returned, as the league had to step in once again and take ownership of the team. Sensing that the writing was on the wall, Coach McCarthy resigned in April 1972. The team looked to be dead, but Charles O. Finley swooped in at the last minute and bought the team. He was the owner of the Oakland Athletics and the California Golden Seals, but he decided to keep the team in Memphis. After holding a name contest, the team would be named the Tams, as they supposedly had fans in Texas, Arkansas, and Mississippi. Along with the weird name, they probably had the ugliest jerseys in league history, as the green, white, and gold colors were meant to be a nod to the color schemes of the teams that he already owned. But he didn't even attend the Tams' home opener, as he was in Oakland with his baseball team. Bob Bass would coach this young squad, as George Thompson and Lee Davis were great additions. But Johnny's selfish attitude would drag the team down, as he was even waived at one point in the season. Even though the team was just starting to establish a new identity, Charles was already in negotiations to move the team to St. Paul, Minnesota. In 2 extreme examples of cheapness, Randy Denton's wife was told that she had to pay for pictures of her husband to send to fans. And when Ron Franz was cut the day before Christmas, he was told that he had to turn in his warm-up jacket, duffel bag, and suitcase before collecting his last paycheck. The front office was in shambles this year as well, as 24 different player transactions took place in a 2-month period. The Tams finished with a terrible 24-60 record, but that was the least of their concerns. Charles had gone MIA for most of the summer, leaving players and staff confused as to what was going on. Bob would resign amidst the chaos, but finally after 2.5 months, the league was able to get a hold of Charles, and somehow in some way, Memphis would survive another season. But due to the lateness of this announcement, the league had to quickly improvise the schedule, and this messed up almost all their radio and TV commitments. The 1973 training camp was underway, but the Tams had no head coach, no front office, and no buyers for their season package. With the players sitting around wondering how to practice, team trainer Don Sparks took it upon himself to run some practices. Charles didn't hire a head coach until 2 days before their preseason debut, as Bill Van Bredekoff was brought in. This team wouldn't be good enough to compete this season, and with the fans continuing to stay away, this year was essentially a wash, as they only won 21 games. After 2 years of barely paying attention to his ABA team, Charles bailed and sold the team back to the league. It seemed like Memphis were the cockroaches of the league, as they continued to survive despite the numerous brushes with death. ABA Commissioner Mike Storman had previously built successful franchises in Indiana and Kentucky, and he felt that Memphis could support a team if the right amount of care was taken. He found several local investors, as Isaac Hayes was the most famous person in this group. This team was given a facelift, and their name was changed to Sounds, and they brought in a lot of talent like Mel Daniels, Freddie Lewis, George Carter, Rick Mount, and Chuck Williams. Joe Mulaney was hired as the new head coach, and there was a lot of optimism in Memphis. The team would struggle early on due to injuries to key players. Mel had already missed a month due to a pulled abdominal muscle, but as he was set to return, he slipped in the bathtub and hurt his back. The Sounds were forced to trade Freddie to the Spirits for Tom Owens, as he tried to fill a huge gap in the front court. Rick Mount had also gotten off to an amazing start, averaging a career-high 20 points after the Lewis trade, but he separated his shoulder and he was never the same. The Sounds would improve late in the season, but there was still uncertainty around the franchise, as there still wasn't a long-term agreement between the team and the Mid-South Coliseum, with the league having to foot many of their bills. Memphis only won 27 games this year, but this was their second highest total since they moved there. They still made the playoffs, facing the Colonels in the semifinals. As expected, the Sounds lost the first 3 games, but 4 players scored at least 20 in Game 4, as Memphis finally secured their first playoff win, despite 25 points and 17 rebounds from Tom in Game 5. The Colonels won by 12 and advanced. After another season in the red, ABA Commissioner Ted Munchak gave the team a strict deadline of June 1st, 1975, as they had to sell 4,000 season tickets, find new investors, and secure a better lease at the Mid-South Coliseum. As you might have guessed, none of this actually happened, and the league took over the team once again. Somehow, someone was willing to buy the team, and in August 1975, the Sounds were sold to a group of Maryland businessmen, marking the beginning of the most bizarre situation in league history. After a few weeks, new ABA Commissioner Dave DeBusschere yanked the team away from the investors, ruling that the team was underfunded. He gave the franchise to a new group of Memphis investors, but suddenly, the Memphis group backed out the very next day, and Dave gave the club back to the Baltimore group, as a $250,000 down payment seemed to get the league off their backs for the moment. The team was first named the Baltimore Hustlers, but the league felt that the name had a negative connotation, so it was changed to the Baltimore Claws. Even as the team was rubbing nickels together, they somehow pulled off a trade for Dan Issel, agreeing to send Tom Owens and $500,000 to the Colonels. But when the money didn't appear in his account, Colonels owner John Y. Brown was furious, roaring into the Claws team offices and forcing them to trade Issel to another team, which would be the Nuggets. But the initial Claws roster was a who's who of obscure talent, as apart from Mel, Chuck, and Stu Johnson, they had guys like Joe Hamilton, Tim Van Blomiston, Claude Terry, and Paul Ruffner. The Claws had also signed Skip Wise from Clemson, as he was the first freshman to be named to the All-ACC first team. He left the Tigers after his freshman season, signing a 5-year, no-cut contract with Baltimore that was worth $700,000. Baltimore managed to play 3 preseason games, and as you can see, they got extremely creative with the jersey design. But it was a miracle that the team was even playing at all, as players and coaches weren't even being paid. Several of them were holed up in a small motel with very little money for food. Their practice gear was ripped to shreds, and there were reports of players selling drugs and getting caught with concealed weapons. Upon hearing the situation, Commissioner Dave gave the owners 4 days to send over $500,000 as a performance bond. The group was able to pull together half of it, but the other $250K would never be paid. While the owners were struggling to pay back the league, they completely neglected the players, as they simply didn't pay any of them for 3 days. Management even promised to provide meal money for the players, but these needs were never met. The league finally took action, officially shutting down the Claws on October 20th, 1975. Mel Daniels had this to say: "It just seems unbelievable. I've been around the ABA for 9 years and felt this would be the most solid year, and now this happens. We worked hard and wanted something good to happen with this team. The guys feel it is part of our lives that has been swooped away. We try hard to keep it together while working real hard in practice, even when we weren't being paid. But now it's all over and we're all down in the dumps." That marked the end of a franchise that simply wouldn't die. No matter where this team was located, no matter if they were the Buccaneers, the Pros, the Tams, the Sounds, the Hustlers, or the Claws, the fans never really seemed interested in this team. They weren't devoid of talent, but terrible upper management doomed them from the start, as they never had the capital to compete, and the incredible lengths they would go to in order to save a few dollars soured the few loyal fans they actually had. Based on the success of the Grizzlies today, in hindsight, one could say that it simply just wasn't time for pro basketball in Memphis yet, but one can also look at all the horrible decisions made by the higher-ups and see where things really went wrong. Thank you guys, I really appreciate y'all for the support. When you see like the history of the team, there's no way that this team should have even survived as long as they did. They never were able to sell out huge arenas, they were never able to consistently get people in the stands, but yet somehow they still survived for 9 years. I don't know how they did. You barely have any money in New Orleans. You move to Memphis. You go through 13 different owners in Memphis. You go from the Pros to the Tams to the Sounds. Then you go to the Baltimore and the team is already done before it starts. Like, they literally just put Claws over top of the Sounds on the jerseys. You know, like those decals that you can hot iron onto a t-shirt. I think I might have to look more into the Skip Wise story, because I feel like that kind of sucks, because you give up all your college eligibility to play in the ABA, but then like the team is just shoddy from the beginning. You sign a 5-year deal, but the team folds 3 or 4 weeks, but you on the team, and now you just gave up all your college eligibility. Where are you going to go now, because you can't play in the NBA because they have the rule? Shout out to y'all, man. I really appreciate y'all for the support. I'm glad you guys really enjoy these ABA videos as much as I do making them. Leave a like if you enjoy, hit that subscribe button if you're new to my channel. Turn on my post notifications if you haven't already. Thank you. Please be safe. I'm out. Peace.